not got your photo yet. Oh, and
and we should all be ready to go. Good evening. Thanks to everyone for logging on. This is the second in the pilot program of online training sessions following last week's really successful look through coaching. This evening's session is all about planning, and fortunate enough to have Barry Elkington presenting for you this evening. Just a quick overview again, just for those that weren't logged on last week, just to give you a bit of an idea about the programme. We're running a 3-session pilot, so last week we looked at coaching, we've got planning this evening, in a couple of weeks' time we'll be looking at developing clubs and how we can grow clubs. The purpose, it all came through from volunteer consultation beginning of the year, where we looked at and people said they were looking for a form of training that would really help and really accessible, and then we developed the idea into these webinars. So short pilot with the hopeful of progressing this for a further 12 months next year. The aims certainly want to get better supported and train people within clubs, get a regular form of training, and the interactivity as we go through as well. So do send in questions if you can through the online system here, or you can look through Twitter as well, and I will answer them as we go through. So send any questions, if you've got an opinion on a certain area, or if you've got any ideas and suggestions, that would be great. If you have logged on anonymously and you send your comment in, do just add your name at the end as well. That will be good. Then we can make sure that we credit you with that idea as well. That's about me done at the moment. I will pass you over to Barry, and we will get started. Enjoy the evening.
okay. Right. Hopefully you can all see me here. It's quite strange operating from this end because I have no idea who's sitting at the other end watching me on the screen. So it will be interesting. Okay. What's really the purpose of this session this evening? We'll be running for about 40 minutes, I think. So let's discuss what you want to achieve out of planning, the challenges, and just look at the key planning requirements for one of the courses. And we've chosen the light green course because it will provoke some discussion, we hope, or at least some questions when we get down to looking at the planning details. So, 2 things really. What do you want to get out of this as a planner? What do the competitors want to get out of it? So what are you trying to provide for the competitors? What are they expecting when they come to your event to run your courses? And we'll talk about that. And then also, you know, planning takes up a lot of time, but involves a lot of time walking around out in the forest, which is presumably why we do it. It's nice to get out there and be the only person in a nice piece of woodland. So what do you personally want to get out of planning? And also think about the benefits it brings to the people that are participating. So I thought we'd start with just looking at some of the challenges, and we'll pick up on these as we go through. First thing is the venue. You know, quite often the planning is restricted by where you've got a suitable car park. You know, it might be very nice if you could start at one end of the wood, but if the parking is 3 miles away at the other end, you really can't do that. Terrain, it's nice if you live in the Lake District or in Scotland. If you happen to live where I live in Warwickshire, then there's not a lot of great terrain to plan on. So how do you make the best of that? We're seeing more and more restrictions from out of bounds areas, triple SIs, etc. So how do we get around those? I'm sure you'll all face the challenge of how up to date is the map. You know, how usable is it? Who's going to update the map if it needs updating? We also, as planners, always face the challenge of needing to fit in all the courses. So you might think, oh, it's a great start and finish and a great venue for putting in a brown course or a blue course. what do you do about the white course and the yellow course? You have to think about those as well. And generally, you know, that controls a lot of what you do. And then, of course, you've got all the last minute changes where somebody decides to come along and fell a piece of the forest at the last minute, or suddenly decide, no, you're not allowed to go in that piece of woodland after all. And if people would like to put in some of the thoughts about other challenges they faced in the question and answer, if anybody's got any other comments they'd like to make. So the system here is not great in that I can't see the screen and the questions at the same time. So if somebody likes the background here, thank you. That's Peter's posters. And yeah, we are trying to get out. People are after a challenging, enjoyable run. So yeah, agree with those. And I need to go back to the. We go back to the main screen again. That's right. I can't see the screen and the messages at the same time, and that's a problem with the conferencing facility. So, going on to the next thing. Whatever you do with planning, you know, first things first. You need to make sure you know where you're going to be parking cars, and if you're going to have an assembly area, where is it going to be? It's pointless planning your courses and then discovering you started at the wrong end of the wood. We've talked about the start and the finish. Quite often that will be determined by where you need to put the white and yellow courses. And so you need often to think about doing that first. And although it might be nice to say, well, we'll have separate starts and finishes for the harder courses than the simple ones, that's fine if you've got the resources to do it, but most clubs probably haven't. So you know, your start and finish will largely be determined by the easy courses. And if you have to compromise in terms of you can't have both the finish and the start very close to the car park and the assembly, then normally it's better to have the finish close by and the start further away. At least then people are going to the start before they're worn out, and it gives them a bit of a chance to warm up. And I would always try and meet the organizer on site. Once you've decided where you want your start and finish to be, and perhaps drafted out some rough courses, meet the organizer, agree on exactly where you're going to have the start, where you're going to have the finish, and make sure that they're happy with it. That can save an awful lot of wasted work. And while you're there, you know, go and have a look at the restrictions, out of bounds, crags, etc. Will you need to take them? Are they always on the map? Do you really need to make sure that the courses avoid them completely? So that you do that first, and that's the starting point. So when you start thinking about planning, in this case, we're going to talk about the light green course. Who are you actually aiming this at? And typically, the light green course is juniors, MW14, so which it's their standard course at age-related events. Seniors, people who don't want to run a long course. In a lot of areas, a light green course is probably the most difficult you can do at that distance. And also it's a step up for newcomers coming through the sport who've got as far as the orange course and are now moving to the next technical difficulty up. So having established that's who we're trying to keep happy, the next thing is, you know, what skills are we looking to test? And these people, if they've been orienteering for some time, and they should be if they're doing light greens, they shouldn't be, you should be looking to test, can they read the contours now? Can they read basic contours, hills, re-entrance, spurs, and can they actually navigate by using them? So can they get around the course without just following paths and line features? They should also be able to use a compass to take rough bearings when they're needed and accurate bearings when they're needed, and know when to take which type. And the third thing we should now be testing is route choice. You know, should you go straight? Should you go round? Should you follow the tracks? Should you go cross country? So if we've got any questions coming up there, go up to the top. It's a two-man operation, this. All right, yeah, we've got a few more challenges here. Yes, public might vandalise the controls. That's something you need to think about. That really quite often comes into the issues of, especially if you're grippling controls, actually have you got somewhere to tie the control to? And that's something I've learned with urban events in the last year or so, that you can fix some fantastic control sites, and when you get there you realize that actually there's nowhere to gripple the control to. And certainly if you're planning these events in parks and like, then maybe you need to think about, if you're going to have a control that's easily accessible to the public, how can you gripple it to something and still have it in the right place? And the next one down is another challenge. Can I get all the controls out in the time available? And the answer is, if you're as old as I am, probably not. So can you put some out the night before, or can you get somebody to help you? Get a couple of younger helpers perhaps to put the controls out, and you can go around and check them, because a lot of the time is taken actually carrying controls which are not that light. So start to think about how you can make the planning easier for yourself. So, oops. Right, I need to go back now to the back to the bottom. Right. Okay. So having established all of the basic principles of where you're going to have the start, where you're going to have the finish, the car park, you kind of get onto the course planning side of it. And there are some things which are the basics, and there's really no excuse for getting this wrong. The first thing is get the course length and the height climb correct. If it's a light green course on the color coded scale, then it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 4 kilometers long. It'll be at the low end if you're on a technically difficult area or a steep area, and at the 4 kilometer end if you're on a relatively easy running, not too hilly piece of ground. And it's always worth going back and looking at previous results of events in the same area and see how long the competitors took then, and see if they were in the right sort of range that you'd expect. Always bearing in mind that what the weather might have been or what the course might have been planned like. But if you're outside of that 3 to 4 kilometer range, the chances are that you've probably got something wrong somewhere. The next thing is to understand what technical difficulty 4, which is what light green courses are planned to, actually means. So make sure you've read and understand the guidelines. It's covered in the appendices to the rules. It tells you exactly what skills you should be testing, what controls are and aren't allowed. And the other thing I would promote is the article on planning light green courses, which is on the BOF website, which again gives some examples, and we'll go through some of that in the next few minutes. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of the UK actually doesn't support courses any harder than light green standard. They might be longer, but they're not technically more difficult. And the one thing you mustn't do is to dumb down the light green course just because you want to make the green course harder. If the light green course is planned at the right technical difficulty, and the green course is the same technical difficulty and any longer, that's all you can do. You mustn't make it easier, because if you do that, you will have people who don't really feel they've been correctly challenged by the course. So no dumbing down. And the final thing as a planner, which really applies to planning all courses, is make sure that there are clearly identifiable control sites. They're well defined, distinct from the terrain, that they're easily read from the map. You can tell where you are. And if in doubt, just don't use it. The number of events I've been to where I've had discussions with the planner afterwards and said, oh, I really didn't like that. And he said, oh yeah, I did wonder about that. I thought the map might have been a bit iffy. And I think to myself, well, in that case, why on earth did you use it? If you don't cause problems for yourself and don't cause controversy, it really isn't worth it. So yeah, and the controller, a good controller will pick you up on that as well. So that was one of my learnings from early days of being controlled by Brian Parker and Devon. That yeah, you really don't want to cause yourself unnecessary problems. So, right, what I'm going to do, oh, that's right, it's my phone going in the background. What I'm going to go through now is four examples of good planning of good legs on light green courses, showing how you test the four different types of techniques and skills that you want to test the orienteers on, the competitors on. And the first one is navigating a long leg on a rough compass bearing to a collecting feature. And you have the collecting features because at this level, although you kind of want to encourage people to perhaps make mistakes and lose time, you don't want them to get hopelessly lost. It's not very encouraging to a 14-year-old or to somebody that's relatively new to for that to happen. So this is a good example of a long leg, and you can see you need to take you up. You could just run all the way down the earth wall, round the stream and back again. But a good competitor will try and run that in a straight line. If they hit the re-entrant properly, then they can then run down the re-entrant. If they run too far to the south, they'll hit the track. If they run too far to the north, they'll also hit the road, the forest road. So that's a really good testing leg for a light green course, in that a good competitor who does it right will hit the control and not lose any time at all. And those that struggle should be able to pick themselves up fairly easily, and if necessarily relocate off the nice bend in the path and come back to where the control is. So that's the first example. The second example is testing the skill of being able to do fine orienteering on a short leg using an accurate compass bearing. I've got a couple of examples here. The first one, you can either run it straight or you can use the track junctions to the north east or the southeast to attack the man-made object sitting in the middle of the forest. But again, the last bit, the last sort of 100 meters, is going to have to be done on a fairly accurate compass bearing if you're going to find the control site. But again, you know, the competitors shouldn't get really lost because it's within a well-defined piece of wood, and the worst that can happen is they have to go back out to the track and try again. So that's the left-hand example. The right-hand example is coming down a slope from a platform to a platform. Again, a good compass bearing will take you directly to the control. If you're too high, you'll hit the track. If you go too far down, you'll hit the river. So again, the mistake is fairly well confined to not being lost and not spending a lot of time wandering around, trying to work out where you are. You should be able to relatively quickly figure out a relocating feature and go back to the control once you've missed it. And this is a key point of all of these legs, that the losing time, it should be fairly small. Right. Third skill that we're testing is navigating short distances using simple contour features. And again, this is major hills, spurs, re-entrants. A couple of examples here. One following a ridge line. I think that's actually along the top of the Malvern Hills, for those that know it. And the second one is where you head off probably to the track junction and then take a rough westerly bearing, and if you read the contours, you go along the top of the hill and down the re-entrance, and that should take you to the control. And again, you know, if you miss, you're going to be collected by the road, and you can sort yourself out from there. Right. And the final skill which you want to try and test is route choice. And this is a longer route choice leg on a very, I know it's a very flat area. It's got one contour on it, which really isn't probably a lot of use to anybody. And you have a choice. There are all sorts of line features on there. There are tracks, there are ditches, and you could almost follow the tracks and the ditches to the control site, but that is quite a long way round. And so you're setting the competitor the challenge, you know, how much do I deviate off the straight line to make sure I know exactly where I am, and how much do I aim off to one side and then turn towards the thickets that have got the control between them. So again, you're making the competitor think about what's the optimum route. And once again, you've got a field to the north, which if you do get lost, you can go to there and come back again. So, right. And then this has taken far less time than I expected. If all goes to plan, you know, what should you do afterwards? Well, talk to the competitors at the finish. You know, what did they enjoy? What didn't they enjoy? Get their personal feedback. And, you know, if they're furious at you, don't be too upset. You know, if people have had a bad run, they'll always blame the planner, the map, anything but themselves. So don't be offended by what they say. When you get home after the event, look at win splits, look at where people have made mistakes, where have they lost time. If one control has caused a lot of problems, you know, is that because it wasn't very well placed? Is it because the map isn't right? Try and understand if a lot of people have lost time on one control, why that is. You know, was it bad navigating, or was it something that perhaps could have been placed better, or perhaps you shouldn't have used it at all? And look at route gadget. You know, did competitors find the route choices that you hadn't even thought of? And I've had that happen to me where, you know, I thought I'd seen all the routes and somebody has put a route up there and I thought, oh yeah, that looks actually really good. You know, perhaps it's gone even further from the straight line than I would ever have thought of going, but it's actually given them a really nice path run, track run, and virtually no climb. So it's always worth having a look at that, because as a planner, you can always learn from the event too. You can learn two things. One is how to plan better courses next time. But also as an orienteer, you can probably learn quite a lot about how to improve your own orienteering, which is probably a pretty good reason for being a planner, in that it actually gives you an awful lot of training in reading the map and in evaluating routes and controls and improving your own orienteering. So I'm kind of hoping there might be some questions. No.
There you go.
So, okay. Right, so we've got some comments, some good examples. Would anybody like to type in any questions they've got for me? Because otherwise we're going to be finishing this session a few minutes earlier than I originally thought.
Yeah, anyone got any experiences within planning themselves where they learned a valuable lesson or was particularly challenging? Is there any questions there that could experiences that you've got that you could share? What would you say, Barry's probably been your biggest challenge? What do you think your biggest challenge was when you first started planning?
When I first started planning, there was the standard of courses then were defined as easy, medium and hard, and everybody's definitions of easy, medium and hard was different. So what an experienced orienteer thought was easy, I felt as hard. And that was how the planning guidelines got written in the first place, was actually to try and take those concepts and put them into a structure which said, actually, these are the 5 courses, the color-coded courses, and this is the skills that you should be trying to test on them and how the planning should be done. And I think it made me think a lot about how it was done. And the biggest person that gave me education was I say, Brian Parker, who controlled a number of events. Although he was from Devon, his parents lived, or his mother lived up in the Midlands, and he used to come and control the major events up here. And he taught me, that this whole thing, if in doubt, don't do it.
Yeah.
And also, when you're looking at a control site, don't just assume that the competitors will come in the direction that you think they will. And therefore, it's no good only checking the control approach from the track junction. You need to look at what it looks like coming in from the other side as well. And I learnt that when I put a control in a re-entrant from a path junction and thought, oh, that's fine. And the controller checked it and said, that's fine. And at the event, what we discovered was we had the control in a small re-entrant, which wasn't even on the map. And had we gone 30 yards further, we'd have found the big one that was. And lo and behold, some people had missed the little one, missed the control flag, and ended up in the big re-entrance. Gone up and down it, couldn't find it. So, okay, I've got a couple of questions here. First one was, however long you think it will take, double it. That may be related to putting the controls out, or the planning process. Yeah, it's worth spending a lot of time, and quite often I will plan some courses and then put them down and leave them for a week, and then come back and have another look at them, because you see them differently after a week. So it will take a long time, and putting controls out does take a long time. Always does take longer than you think. And second question, the physical aspects for a light green course compared to, say, a green. Yes, I think we're again, living in Warwickshire, it's less of a problem because we don't have technically very rough ground. But again, going back to the potential competitors for the light green course, you've got quite young children, so MW14s, when they first start are only 12 years old, and you've got older people on. So physically, you don't want to have huge climbs, and you also don't want to have steep gullies and pits, which actually are hard to climb in and out. That's true for light green. It's also true for the short green courses and the very short green courses for all the competitors. You need to think about the physical ability of older competitors and their flexibility of getting in and out ditches and gullies, and their ability to climb up and down steep slopes. So as well as being technically slightly easier than green and blue, I would say light greens also need to be physically slightly easier as well.
Finally, sort of from me, what would you say is, from your point of view, is the most enjoyable aspect that you get out of planning?
The most enjoyable thing is actually when people say they've enjoyed their run. That's why I do it, really. Yeah. Although it is quite nice to wander around the forest at times. Although it can be frustrating. I think what's frustrating is when you're wandering around on an old map and you realise that actually the thoughts that you could get away without updating it have gone away, and that somebody's actually going to need to spend a bit of time updating the map before you can actually provide a fair event. Either that, or you have to miss quite large chunks of the forest out, which isn't really great. But yeah, I mean, if you've planned some good courses and people come back and have a good discussion about how they've enjoyed it and how they had trouble with the controls, as long as you're happy that they were fair, then it's good.
And what would be your one bit of advice for anybody that's really new or hasn't even done a planning course yet but is interested? What would be your one main bit of advice to that planner before they go into other courses?
I suppose it's kind of how do you get started into planning, and I think you probably try and work with somebody else on the first event, and read. I mean, I would say read the 5 articles on planning the different standards of courses, because that will take you through. It does take, it'll take you a bit of time to look at it. But if you've been orienteering for some time, you should understand you know, the basics of the different levels, and the examples and the definition of the skills is all there. And then just look at other courses. You know, if you're planning an event on an area, go and have a look at what was planned a year before or 2 years before, and just evaluate them, or evaluate courses at other events in your club. And do you think they're good or they're bad? And do they look like they adhere to the guidelines? So that's how to get started. Right.
Well, we have another one that's come through from Lucy.
Right, taking the example of a light green courses, if you have an area where there is limited path network, to what extent are contour features reasonable as boundaries for constraining areas for controls requiring bearings? I guess that you're stuck. You've got to use them to some extent, but they need to be almost unmissable contour features. And I think, you know, when you look at people's map reading ability, reading contours is the least natural thing to do when you're new to the sport. It's fairly easy to spot a river because you get wet feet, or a road or a path. And I suppose things like distinct ridges are fine. It's spotting re-entrants and spurs, which will need to be very, very distinctive, and the person's got to realise that, you know, that's what they were going for. And you know, as an orienteer, I know I have problems when I want the third re-entrant along, of actually knowing, you know, have I actually gone over 3 re-entrants or not? So I think you've got to be careful when you're trying to use contour features as boundaries, because it's not the thing that people naturally count, or at least not people who live where I am, when they come to the lakes or Scotland, don't count. You know, you tend to look for paths, and you're not used to counting re-entrants and spurs. So that's the difficulty with doing that. But if you've got no other choice, then yeah, try and plan it such that there is a contour feature behind.
Love the comment that's just come in as well.
Yeah.
Very true, very true.
Yeah, I mean, I go way down to that you know, when you're planning white courses, you know, you have to actually look at a control from a competitor's eye level. So get down on your hands and knees, because a child is probably only 3 foot high, and they maybe not, you can't even see over the grass. Yeah.
They don't want to be head high into the brambles, no. Is it? They comment about.
But I would try and keep out of brambles altogether if you can, and try. You know, it's not nice. Nobody likes running through big brambles. Okay. Well, we're starting to we're getting several questions now.
Let me just go back to this.
To help people read re-entrants and spurs, should there be tags on the contours? There should certainly be tags on depressions, and it depends how complex the contours are. I find them quite useful, but I think a lot of planners don't. Sorry, of mappers don't put them on. Because they think you should be able to determine the shape of the ground without them. Yeah, you're kind of stuck, I guess, with what the planner's done. But form lines in particular need to have, and depressions obviously have them on. I like, if they help you read the map, I'd like to see them on there, but that's a debate to have with the mapper. All right, sorry, we've just done the one on there.
That's that one.
That's that one. Yeah, sorry, I missed the tags on the contours ones.
That was the no, that was
right.
Sorted. I think that's
right.
Have a look onto the last.
We got any more
through? I think we'll finish just on this slide, and then we'll have a quick flick back, see if there's any more last minute questions that come through.
Do you want to do this one? Yeah, so swap seats again.
I'll come on through. So, brilliant. Many thanks for tuning in this evening. As I say, this is very much still a pilot program. Really want to hear your thoughts. What subjects you'd like to see? Is it different areas of planning, coaching? Is there something completely different? Psychology within orienteering was mentioned last week. Great idea. Anything that would benefit yourselves is what we're looking for to provide. Talked about the next session a couple of weeks time, 18th of October. We're looking at developing your club. and with more information be going out about that shortly as well. So do get in touch with us as we come through. I think that's about wraps it up. I think there's
right, if there are no more questions.
No, I think that's looking like about it at the moment.
Yeah. We'd be interested in your feedback, particularly whether this has been useful as a sort of introduction to planning the light green, or just a chance to review what you hopefully have been doing all the time. So thank you very much for dialing in and listening.
Thank you. Like I say, get in touch with us if you've got any ideas, and certainly obviously feedback from the session. Thanks for listening. Have a good evening.